question is, when was the last time you cried in front of someone? Because there can be nothing that seems more intimidating or less fun than finding a stranger, asking them when they've cried in front of someone else, and then telling them about the time you cried in front of someone else. We've been married for 20 years, but I would come home from a long day at the office. I was a reporter at the New York Times at that point, and I would start complaining about my day, about how I'm not appreciated enough, and my wife very reasonably would offer me some great advice. And instead of being able to hear her, I would get even more upset. And I would say things like, "Why aren't you supporting me?" And she would get upset because I was attacking her for giving me good advice. And in fact, this is exactly what was happening with me and my wife, right? I was coming home and having an emotional conversation. My wife was responding with a practical conversation. But because we weren't having the same conversation at the same moment, we weren't really communicating with each other. And within neurology and psychology, this insight is known as the matching principle, which says that successful communication requires recognizing what kind of conversation is occurring and then matching each other. If you are a school teacher, and you'll probably learn at some point that if a student comes up to you with a problem or they want something they want to talk about, you should ask them, do you want to be helped, which is a practical conversation? Do you want to be hugged, which is an emotional conversation? Or do you want to be heard, which is a social conversation? But luckily, there is another way of doing this for all of us normal people, which is to ask questions, and in particular, to ask a certain type of question, a special question, what's known as a deep question. You could ask them, what do you love about your job? Instead of asking someone, where did you go to high school? You could say, what was high school like? Wait, what changed you there? Put differently, instead of asking about the facts of someone's life, we should ask them how they feel about their life. Because when we do, they tend to reveal to us who they really are. They tend to tell us what they want not only out of this conversation, but how they hope that we'll see them and how they want to see us, what matters to them most. In fact, what studies show us is that this is so powerful because these kinds of questions allow us to be vulnerable. And vulnerability and reciprocal vulnerability, when we hear vulnerability and we become vulnerable in return, is the key to allowing us to connect with other people. What you need to do is you need to start asking deep questions. So 2 weeks later, after having this conversation, a 62-year-old man comes into Dr. He had just gotten his diagnosis of having prostate cancer. Instead of giving him advice, instead of telling him what he ought to do, he asks the question. He asks the question, what does this cancer diagnosis mean to you? And the man starts talking, and he starts talking about how his father had died when he was 17 years old. And this had just been so hard for him, and it had been so hard for his mom.